David Clark was a man frozen in time, a father whose heart had become as cold as the Seattle winter after losing the love of his life in 2023. He thought his story was over, but a dying wish and a mysterious nurse named Elena were about to prove him wrong. This is a journey of a broken family, a secret letter and a promise kept for 730 days. But can a man truly find room in his heart for someone new without betraying the memory of the woman he lost? Can a 7-year-old girl accept a stranger as a bridge to her past, or will her grief tear the family apart forever? Stay with us as we explore what it truly means to heal the price of loyalty and the staggering power of a love that plans for a future it will never see. What would you do if the person you loved most chose your next partner for you? Let us find out if David finds the strength to live again, or if the shadows of the past are simply too long to escape. Before we continue, please do not forget to like and subscribe to support our channel for more stories like this. The winter of 2025 arrived in suburban Seattle with a biting wind that rattled the window panes of the Clark household. Inside, the air felt just as cold. David Clark stood in his kitchen, staring at a cup of coffee that had long since stopped steaming. To anyone else, it was the week before Christmas, a time of twinkling lights and festive gatherings. To David, it was simply the 730th day of a long, colorless winter. It had been exactly 2 years since Amelia passed away, and David had spent every hour of that time trying to outrun the silence she left behind. He buried himself in his work at Clark & Sons Construction. He was the first one at the job site at 0600, and the last one to leave when the sun dipped below the horizon. If his hands were busy with hammers and nails, his mind could not drift toward the memory of her laughter or the scent of her perfume. He lived his life in a state of emotional frost, a man who moved and spoke but did not truly feel. Down the hallway, a small door creaked open. Maya, his 7-year-old daughter, stepped into the kitchen. She was a quiet child, far too quiet for a girl her age. Before the year 2023, the house had been filled with her singing and the constant sound of her running feet. Now she moved like a shadow. She sat at the kitchen table and looked at the bare corner of the living room where a tall green Christmas tree used to stand. "Good morning, Maya," David said, his voice sounding rusty even to his own ears. "Morning, Dad," she replied softly. She did not ask about the tree. She had stopped asking months ago, perhaps realizing that her father could not handle the weight of a holiday that belonged so deeply to her mother. David watched her and felt a sharp pang in his chest, one of the few feelings that could still pierce through his frozen exterior. He knew he was failing her. He was providing a house and food, but he was not providing joy. He was a ghost inhabiting a home, and Maya was learning how to be a ghost too. The silence was broken by the loud, rhythmic knocking at the front door. David did not need to check the peephole to know it was Ben Harris. Ben had been his best friend since they were boys in 1995, and he was the only person who still dared to push against David's walls. Ben walked in without waiting for an invitation, bringing a gust of cold air and a forced sense of cheer. He looked at the empty house and then at David's tired eyes. "David, we need to talk about the Amelia Clark Memorial Scholarship Fund," Ben said, leaning against the counter. "The donor I told you about is in town. She's a major philanthropist and she wants to meet you tonight." David sighed and shook his head. "Ben, it is Christmas week. I have 3 job sites to close before the holiday. This is for Amelia, David." Ben said, his voice turning serious. "She wants to hear about the vision you and Amelia had. 7 o'clock tonight at the Harbor View Cafe. Do not let her down." David looked at Maya, then back at Ben. He felt a heavy sense of obligation. If it was for Amelia's legacy, he could not say no. He agreed, unaware that Ben had just made a very similar phone call to a woman named Elena, telling her a completely different story. Ben watched his friend, hoping that this small deception would be the spark to finally melt the ice. The Harbor View Cafe was filled with the warm scent of roasted beans and the soft hum of holiday music when David Clark arrived at 19:00. He adjusted the collar of his heavy coat, feeling out of place among the couples sharing peppermint mochas and the students hunched over glowing laptops. He scanned the room for a woman who looked like a wealthy philanthropist. Instead, his eyes landed on a figure in the far corner booth that made his heart skip a beat, though not for the reasons one might expect. A woman sat there dressed in a simple dark sweater, her hands wrapped around a white porcelain mug. David froze. He remembered those hands. He remembered the way they had checked Amelia's pulse and the gentle way they had adjusted her pillows in those final difficult weeks of 2023. This was not a donor. This was Elena Rodriguez, the hospice nurse who had been a constant presence in his home during the darkest days of his life. Confusion turned into a hot, sharp wave of anger. He walked toward the booth, his footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. Elena looked up, and for a moment the same shock he felt was mirrored in her eyes. "David," she whispered, her voice filled with a strange mixture of relief and hesitation. "You came." "Where's the donor, Elena?" David asked, his voice low and vibrating with tension. "Ben told me I was meeting someone to discuss Amelia's scholarship fund." Elena blinked in surprise, her grip tightening on her mug. "Ben called me this afternoon," she said softly. "He told me that you were struggling. He said you had questions about Amelia's final days that you were finally ready to ask. He said you needed to talk to the person who was there at the very end." David let out a harsh, dry laugh. He turned his head and looked out the window at the dark Seattle sky. He felt a deep sense of betrayal. Ben had lied to both of them. His best friend had manufactured a crisis just to force two people from a painful past into the same room. It was a blind meeting disguised as a business transaction, and David felt like a fool for falling for it. "This was a mistake," David said, grabbing the back of the empty chair but refusing to sit down. "Ben had no right to do this. He had no right to drag you into this, and he certainly had no right to trick me. I am leaving." He turned on his heel, his mind already racing toward the exit. He wanted to get back to his truck, back to the silence of his house, and back to the safety of his work. He did not want to look at Elena because looking at her reminded him of the hospital bed in the middle of his living room. She was a living reminder of the moment his world ended. "David, wait," Elena called out. He did not stop. He pushed past a group of carolers near the door, his hand reaching for the brass handle. He just needed to breathe. He needed to be anywhere else. "Amelia wanted me to find you," Elena said, her voice rising just enough to cut through the noise of the cafe. The words acted like a physical barrier. David stopped with his hand still resting on the door handle. He did not turn around immediately. He stood perfectly still as the sounds of the cafe seemed to fade into a distant hum. Those 5 words felt like a message from the other side, a voice from the year 2023 reaching out to claim him in the present. He turned slowly, his face pale. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Elena stood by the booth, her expression steady, despite the tears beginning to shimmer in her eyes. "She made me promise, David. Before she passed, she told me that 2 years from now, during Christmas week, I had to find you and tell you exactly what she said." The noise of the Harbor View Cafe seemed to retreat into a dull roar as David walked back to the booth. He sat down heavily, his legs feeling like lead. Across from him, Elena looked exhausted. The flicker of the holiday candles on the table cast deep shadows under her eyes, revealing a weariness that David recognized all too well. It was the look of someone who had spent too much time in the company of sorrow. "I almost did not come tonight," Elena admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "When you looked at me with such anger just a moment ago, I felt a weight pull at my heart. I have been carrying this secret for 730 days, David. There were nights in 2024 when I felt so drained by the grief I witness every day as a nurse that I wanted to throw that letter away. I thought to myself, who am I to interfere in a man's life 2 years later? David watched her, his own anger beginning to dissolve into a strange, hollow curiosity. Why did you stay? Because of what Amelia said to me at the very end, Elena replied. She looked at me from her bed and said, Elena, you spend your life caring for those who are leaving, but you forget to care for yourself. When you find David in 2 years, do not just give him the message. Tell him that you both deserve to breathe again. She knew David. She knew I would feel guilty and tired, and she knew you would be exactly where you are right now. Elena reached into her bag and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. It was worn at the edges, clearly handled many times. She placed it on the table between them. David stared at his name written in the elegant cursive script he had loved since they met in 2010. Below the letter, Elena placed a small digital tablet. She made me swear to wait, Elena explained. She said that if I gave this to you too early, you would not hear it. She believed it would take exactly 2 years for the shock to fade enough for the truth to sink in. She called it her final plan. David felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Seattle winter. It was a staggering realization. Amelia had calculated his grief with the precision of an architect. She knew that in 2023 he would be numb, and in 2024 he would be angry. She had waited for this specific week in 2025 because she knew this was the moment his walls would start to crumble under the weight of Maya's silence. It was a necessary fiction he had told himself that he was fine, but Amelia had seen through the future to the man he had become. Elena pressed a button on the tablet and pushed it toward him. The screen flickered to life and suddenly Amelia was there. She looked thin, and her voice was a ghost of its former strength, but her eyes were as bright as the Pacific Ocean. Hi, David, the recording began. If you are seeing this, it means Elena kept her promise, and it means you have survived 2 years without me. I am so sorry I had to leave you with all that work, but I need you to listen now. David put his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking as the sound of her voice filled the small space between him and Elena. For the first time, he did not look away. He did not run. He sat in the grief, and for a moment the why ta and the go of who found a common ground. Elena reached across the table and placed her hand near his, not touching, but offering a silent witness to the pain they both understood. They were 2 survivors of a long war, finally allowed to lay down their weapons in the quiet of a December night. The cream-colored envelope sat on David's nightstand for 3 agonizing days. He stared at it every morning before the sun rose, and every night before he finally succumbed to a restless sleep. Each time he reached for it, his fingers would tremble and he would pull back. The video in the cafe had cracked his frozen exterior, but the letter felt like the final blow to the fortress he had built since 2023. He was terrified of what it would ask of him, and even more terrified of the hope it might ignite. The turning point came on a Tuesday evening, December 23rd, 2025. The house was shrouded in a heavy, dusty silence. David was sitting in the dimly lit living room staring at the empty space where Amelia used to place the nativity scene. Maya appeared in the doorway clutching a worn teddy bear. She did not come to sit with him. She simply stood there, her eyes fixed on his face with an expression of profound loneliness. Dad, she said, her voice so small it was almost a whisper. Yes, Maya. She took a hesitant step forward. I think I am forgetting what it feels like when you are happy. You are here, Dad, but you are not really here. You are like a photograph of yourself. The words struck David with more force than any hammer he had swung on a construction site. He looked at his daughter and saw the reflection of his own ghost. He realized that by trying to protect himself from the pain of Amelia's absence, he had abandoned Maya in the middle of her own grief. He was a father who had forgotten how to lead his child back toward the light. He spent an hour after Maya went to bed sitting in the dark, the letter finally open in his hands. Amelia's words were a gentle command to live again. She did not want a memorial. She wanted a home filled with laughter. The next morning, David called Elena. He did not call because he was looking for a date or a new romance. He called because Elena was the only person on earth who understood the weight of the secret he carried. She was the witness to Amelia's final wish, and he knew he could not take the first step toward the attic boxes alone. "I need help, Elena," he said when she answered. "I need to bring Christmas back for Maya, and I do not think I can face the boxes by myself." Elena arrived 20 minutes later wearing a warm coat and a look of quiet determination. For the next 5 hours, the house was transformed. Maya's eyes grew wide with wonder as they hauled dusty crates from the garage. They cleaned away the cobwebs of the last 2 years and began to string lights along the banister. The smell of pine needles and furniture polish replaced the stale air of neglect. As they sat on the floor, later that evening surrounded by tissue paper and half-empty boxes, David finally read the rest of Amelia's letter aloud to Elena. "I chose Elena for this task," Amelia had written in her steady hand, "because I watched her in those final weeks. I saw her kind heart. I saw the way she looked at the world with a compassion that most people lose after seeing so much pain. David, she is someone who understands that love is not about replacing what was lost, but about making the heart big enough to hold both the past and the future." David looked at Elena, who was wiping a tear from her cheek. For the first time in 2025, the house did not feel like a museum of sorrow. It felt like a place where a new story might finally begin. The spring of 2026 had arrived with a gentle warmth that seemed to mirror the softening of David's heart. Over the past 6 months, the friendship between David and Elena had grown into something deeper and more significant. It was a slow and careful process, built on Sunday afternoon walks in the park and quiet dinners after Elena finished her shifts at the hospital. Elena had become a frequent presence in their lives, helping Maya with her science projects and teaching her how to bake the perfect lemon tart. To the outside world, they looked like a natural fit, but David knew that the most important bridge was yet to be crossed. One warm evening in June 2026, David decided it was time to speak the truth. He had prepared a special dinner, and the house felt peaceful. Elena was sitting at the table smiling as Maya recounted a story from school. David looked at the two of them and felt a flicker of hope he had not known since before 2023. He waited for a lull in the conversation before reaching out to take Elena's hand. "Maya," David said, his voice steady but gentle. "You know how much we both enjoy having Elena around. She has become very important to me and to us. We wanted to tell you that Elena and I are together now. She is my girlfriend." The reaction was instantaneous and devastating. The cheerful expression on Maya's face vanished, replaced by a look of sharp crystalline terror. She dropped her fork, and the sound of metal hitting the ceramic plate echoed through the silent room. She looked at their joined hands as if they were a betrayal of everything she held dear. "No," Maya whispered, her voice trembling. David leaned forward, reaching for his daughter's hand. "Maya, it is okay. This does not change how much I love you or how much we love Mommy." Maya stood up so quickly her chair nearly toppled over. Her small face was flushed with a mixture of anger and grief that David had tried so hard to heal. "It is not okay," she shouted, her voice breaking. "Mommy is still here. Her pictures are here. Her books are here. I still talk to her every night. Maya, please listen," Elena said softly, her eyes filled with a nurse's deep compassion. "I do not want to listen to you," Maya screamed, directed at Elena. "You were supposed to be a friend. You are trying to take her place. I do not need another mom. I already have a mom, and she is better than anyone." Maya turned and ran toward the stairs, her footsteps thundering against the wood. A moment later, the sound of her bedroom door slamming shut vibrated through the house. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. David sank back into his chair, his head in his hands. He felt a familiar coldness creeping back into his chest. Elena stayed quiet for a long time, her hand still resting on the table where David had held it. She did not look offended. She looked heartbroken for the little girl upstairs. David looked up at Elena, his eyes wet with frustration. "I thought we were doing so well. I thought she liked you." "She does like me," Elena replied quietly. "But liking me as a visitor is different from accepting me as a part of the space that belongs to Amelia. To Maya, loving me feels like she is officially saying goodbye to her mother. She is not fighting us. She is guarding a sacred memory that she thinks we are trying to erase." David looked at the stairs, realizing that the journey ahead was much steeper than he had imagined. They had brought the house back to life, but the heart of his daughter was still a fortress, and Amelia's memory was the only guard at the gate. The house remained heavy with silence for hours after Maya had retreated to her room. David sat on the edge of Maya's bed that night, the soft glow of a nightlight casting long shadows across the floor. Maya was huddled under her blankets, her eyes red from crying. She looked so small, fragile soul trying to hold on to a world that had changed too quickly. "Maya, I need to tell you a secret," David said softly. "It is a secret about Elena and Mommy." Maya did not move at first, but her breathing hitched. David took a deep breath and began to explain the truth that he had carried since that cold night at the cafe in 2025. He told her about the promise Elena had made to Amelia in 2023. He explained that Elena had not just appeared in their lives by accident. She was there because Amelia had specifically chosen her to find them when the time was right. "Elena is not here to take Mommy's place," David whispered. "She is here because Mommy sent her. She is a love messenger, Maya. She promised Mommy that she would help us find our way back to being happy again." Maya finally turned over, her eyes wide with wonder and confusion. "Mommy sent her." David nodded and looked toward the doorway where Elena stood quietly. Elena walked into the room and sat on a small chair near the bed. She did not reach out to touch Maya yet. Instead, she began to speak in a low, melodic voice. "Did you know, Maya, that your mother's favorite time of day was exactly 4 o'clock in the afternoon?" Elena asked. "She told me that was when the light in this room was the prettiest. She told me stories about the way you used to dance in the kitchen while she was making pasta. She remembered the exact way you smelled like sunshine and lavender after a bath." Maya sat up, her interest piqued. "She told you that Elena smiled a gentle and sincere expression. She told me so many things, Maya. She told me about the time you tried to feed the cat your goldfish crackers. She told me how much she loved the way your father looks when he is deep in thought. I know these things because she wanted me to remember them for you. She wanted to make sure that even though she is not here, her love for you would always have a voice." The tension in Maya's small shoulders finally began to dissolve. Elena was no longer a stranger trying to occupy a vacant throne. She was a bridge, a living connection to the mother Maya missed so desperately. Elena provided the tiny, detailed memories that David, in his own grief, had often forgotten to mention. A few days later, as the family gathered around the Christmas tree of 2026, Maya did something that David would remember for the rest of his life. She walked over to a wooden chest in the corner and pulled out a delicate hand-painted glass ornament. It was a bluebird, the very first ornament Amelia had bought for Maya in 2019. It was the most sacred object in the house. Maya walked over to Elena and held out the ornament. "Will you help me put this on the tree?" she asked. Elena's eyes filled with tears as she stood up. "I would be honored, Maya." Together, the woman and the child reached up and placed the bluebird on a high branch. It was a simple, symbolic action, but it carried the weight of an entire world shifting. Maya was not letting go of her mother. She was simply opening the door to let someone else in. As the lights on the tree twinkled, reflecting in the glass of the ornament, David realized that the truth had finally set them free. The The transition from 2026 into 2027 felt different than the years that had come before. The shadow that once hung over the Clark household had lifted, replaced by a light that felt warm and permanent. David and Elena had spent months navigating the delicate balance of their new reality. One of the most profound moments of their journey occurred on a quiet Sunday afternoon when David asked Elena to accompany him to the cemetery. Standing before the headstone of Amelia Clark, they did not feel like strangers or rivals. Instead, they stood as two people who respected the past enough to let it rest. By visiting the grave together, they performed a silent act of acceptance, acknowledging that their love was not a betrayal, but a continuation of a life well lived. In the spring of 2027, David took Elena back to the place where their story had truly begun, the Harbor View Cafe. The table was the same, but the man sitting across from Elena was entirely different from the broken soul she had met in 2025. David reached across the table, taking Elena's hands in his. "Elena, I spent a long time thinking that my heart had a limited amount of room," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought that loving you would mean I had to let go of Amelia. But I realize now that love does not divide, it multiplies. I'm standing here today to ask you to be my wife. I love you not because Amelia wanted it, and not because of a promise made in a hospital room. I love you because you looked into the eyes of a ghost and taught me how to smile again. You chose to stay when the ice was thick, and I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy." Elena looked at him, her eyes shining with joy. She did not answer immediately, taking a moment to breathe in the weight of the moment. "David, Amelia gave me a gift when she asked me to find you," she said softly. "She gave me a purpose and a family. But David, I want you to know that I choose you today for who you are. I am not just the bridge to your past anymore. I am your partner, and I want to be your next home. Yes, I will marry you." The wedding was a small, beautiful ceremony held in the summer of 2027. Maya served as the flower girl, her laughter echoing through the garden. To honor the beginning of their journey, David and Elena decided to transform the initial pretext of their meeting into something tangible and lasting. They merged the original scholarship fund with a new initiative they called the Carer Support Fund. This organization provided financial and emotional resources for hospice nurses and family caregivers, honoring the professions of both Amelia and Elena. It was a legacy built on the idea that those who give so much of themselves also deserve to be held. As the years moved forward, the Clark family grew in ways they never could have imagined during the cold winter of 2023. They lived fully their house, filled with the sounds of music, messy cooking projects, and shared stories. They never stopped talking about Amelia. Her photographs remained on the mantel, and her stories were told to every new friend who entered their home. They proved that choosing joy was not a sign of forgetting, but the highest possible way to honor the ones they had lost. In the heart of Seattle, a new legacy had been built, one that whispered to the world that even after the deepest freeze, the spring would always return. Love teaches us that the heart does not have a limit. It only grows larger with every person we choose to cherish. David, Elena, and Maya found that honoring those we have lost is not about staying frozen in grief, but about carrying their light forward into a new morning. If this story moves, you tell us where you are watching from in the comments, your city, your state, or your country. And do not forget to subscribe for more touching tales. Your likes and shares help these messages of hope reach those who might need them most. Before you go, please click the video appearing on your screen now to continue this journey of healing and love with us.